That watch belonged to my son. Vivian Okafor's voice cut across the entire lobby of Hargrove and Lane like a blade through silk, and every person within earshot stopped breathing. Bernard Okafor had been standing near the reception desk when his mother walked in. He had not expected her. He rarely did anymore. Vivian Okafor moved through rooms the way weather moved through open fields. Without announcement, without apology, leaving people bent in her wake. She was pointing at the watch on the wrist of a woman named Sera Calloway. Sera was 31 years old. She had worked as a paralegal at the firm for 4 years. She wore her dark hair pulled back, her blouse pressed, her shoes sensible. She had been carrying a stack of folders toward the conference room when Vivian's voice stopped her mid-step. Everyone in the lobby was looking at the watch now. It was not flashy. A round face, simple gold case, tan leather strap worn soft from years of handling. The kind of watch a person keeps because it means something, not because it impresses anyone. Vivian took 2 steps forward. "Where did you get that?" Sera's voice came out steady, which surprised even her. "It was my grandfather's." Vivian's chin lifted. "It was my son's, and my son is dead." The lobby did not move. 2 junior associates near the elevator pressed themselves back slightly. The receptionist Danny froze with one hand on the phone she had been about to pick up. Bernard stood near the glass partition between the waiting area and the inner offices. And he felt the familiar cold feeling that always arrived when his mother entered a room he had believed was safe. He had been raised in rooms like this. Rooms where his mother's certainty could fill every corner without touching a single wall. Rooms where her grief had, over the years, quietly become a kind of authority that no one questioned, because questioning it felt like questioning Thomas himself. And Thomas was gone, and people did not question the dead. But Sera Calloway had not removed the watch. She had not lowered her eyes. She stood with the folders pressed against her chest, looking at Vivian Okafor directly. And there was something in her face that Bernard could not quite name. Not anger, not fear exactly. Something older than both. "I understand this must be painful for you," Sera said. "But this watch came from my grandfather. He gave it to me." Vivian's expression did not change. Thieves always have explanations. The word landed like something thrown from a height. Bernard pushed away from the partition. "Mother." She did not look at him. Sera's hands tightened slightly on the folders, but she did not step back. "I'm not a thief," she said. "And I would appreciate if you didn't say that here." Vivian turned very slowly toward the room. Toward the associates, the receptionist, the 2 articling students who had wandered in from the hallway. She used the room the way she always had, as a witness. As a gallery for whatever she chose to perform. "My son Thomas wore that watch every day of his adult life," she said. "I gave it to him on his 25th birthday. I know it the way I know his face." Something shifted in Sera's eyes, not guilt, something quieter and more complicated. Bernard watched it happen, and a feeling moved through him that he could not push away. That this moment was not going to end the way his mother expected. It almost never did lately. He had been thinking that for 6 months now. Ever since Thomas died. Ever since Vivian had started appearing in places without warning. Looking for pieces of Thomas in the world. Furious when she found them in the wrong hands. Bernard was 43 years old. He had spent most of those years managing the distance between his mother and everyone else she might wound. He was good at it. It had cost him 2 relationships and 1 close friendship, but he was very good at it. He looked at Sera Calloway now, still standing in the middle of the lobby with her folders and her grandfather's watch, and he made a decision he did not fully understand yet. He stayed where he was. He did not step in front of his mother. He waited. Sera set her folders carefully on the edge of the reception desk. She turned back to Vivian Okafor. "My grandfather's name was Henry Calloway," she said. "He passed away 3 years ago. He left me the watch himself. He told me it had always been mine to have." Vivian's mouth pressed into a line. "Henry Calloway." She repeated the name the way people repeat things they find beneath them, as though the name itself were a stain she was examining. "I don't know anyone by that name." "You wouldn't have," Sera said. And something in her tone, not rude, just careful, made Bernard look at her more closely. She knew something. He was certain of it. She was choosing how much to say and how fast to say it. Vivian raised her phone. "I'm calling the police." Several people shifted. One of the junior associates took a very small step backward. Sera did not move. "You can do that," she said. "But I'd ask you to look at the watch first. Really look at it, before you make that call." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "The back of the case," Sera said. "There's an engraving." A silence settled over the lobby that felt nothing like peace. Vivian Okafor did not ask to hold the watch. She was not the kind of woman who asked for things. She reached forward with one hand, and Sera, in a movement so small it might not have been noticed, leaned her wrist back by an inch. "I'll show you," Sera said. "But I'm not handing it over." The lobby felt the shift. Even Danny behind the reception desk seemed to register it. That this young woman with sensible shoes and 4 years of service had just declined to hand something to the woman who had helped fund the building they were all standing in. Vivian Okafor's face did something complicated. Bernard found himself holding his breath. Sera turned her wrist over and unclipped the watch with practiced ease. She held it in her open palm, face down, angling it toward Vivian without releasing it. The back of the gold case caught the lobby's recessed lighting. There were words there. Bernard could not read them from where he stood. Vivian could. He watched his mother's face change. It happened slowly, the way ice changes. Not all at once, but starting at the edges, a softening that the rest of the structure had not yet acknowledged. Her lips parted. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. "What does it say?" Bernard asked. Vivian did not answer. Sera spoke, her voice quiet and even. "It says, for the one who carries it forward, and underneath that, HC, 1974. Bernard crossed the lobby in 4 steps and looked at the back of the watch himself. The engraving was worn from decades of contact. The lettering was old, not computer-pressed, hand-cut, the way things were done when the engraving meant something permanent. HC 1974, and the phrase above it, small and looping. Bernard looked up at his mother. "Thomas's watch didn't have any engraving," said. "It did. Mother, I borrowed that watch in 2019. I wore it for 3 weeks while mine was being repaired. There was no engraving on the back." Vivian turned toward him, and for one moment her expression was not authority, it was panic. Then the wall came back up. "You are misremembering," she said. "I'm not." The word landed simply between them. Vivian looked back at the watch. She was still staring at the engraving. HC 1970, and Bernard watched something happen in his mother's face that he had not seen since the days after Thomas died. Not grief dressed in diamonds and black wool. Not grief that held court and received visitors, but grief stripped back to something raw and frightened. She knew those initials. Bernard was suddenly certain of it. The lobby had not resumed its usual noise. People were making small adjustments, turning slightly away, looking at their phones, pretending. But no one had actually left. No one could. Sera carefully reattached the watch to her wrist. Her movements were unhurried. She was giving Vivian time to say something, and Vivian was not saying it. Bernard stepped closer. "Mother." She turned her head very slightly. "HC," he said. "Who was that?" Vivian's jaw tightened. "No one you need to concern yourself with." The answer came too fast. Bernard had spent 43 years learning the difference between his mother's certainty and her deflection. That had been deflection. Sera had been watching their exchange. She spoke carefully. "Mrs. Okafor, I'm not trying to cause you pain. I understand you loved your son. I understand this watch probably looks very much like something you remember. But my grandfather kept this in a velvet case in his bedroom until the week before he died. He took it out himself and put it in my hands." Vivian's eyes returned to her. "And you never asked where it came from?" "I asked," Sera said. "He said it was a reminder that some things are worth keeping." Vivian made a small dismissive sound. "That tells you nothing about where he got it." "No," Sera agreed. "It doesn't. But the engraving is dated 1974. The initials are HC. My grandfather's name was Henry Calloway. That's not a coincidence that needs explaining. That's his watch." Vivian was quiet. Bernard could feel the shape of what was not being said. It pressed against the lobby's polished surfaces like something looking for a way out. "The initials HC," he said slowly. "That's not Thomas's initials." Vivian still said nothing. "Thomas was T.O., Bernard continued. "Thomas Okafor. He never went by a different name. He never had a different initial in his life." Bernard looked at his mother steadily. "So whose watch did you think you recognized exactly?" The lobby waited. Vivian Okafor pressed her lips together. She was 70 years old, and she had spent every one of those years learning how to fill silences rather than be filled by them. But right now she said nothing. And the nothing told Bernard more than she meant it to. Bernard Okafor had not come to Hargroven Lane that morning looking for old wounds. He had come for a meeting about a property trust his mother's accountant had flagged. He had been exactly 17 minutes early, which was how he preferred things. He had been standing near the reception desk with a coffee he had barely touched, checking a message on his phone, when the front door had opened and his mother had walked in and changed the shape of the morning entirely. That was the thing about Vivian Okafor. She did not arrive. She altered. Bernard set his untouched coffee down on the reception desk and looked at Sera. "How long has your family had the watch?" "My grandfather had it from at least the early 70s, she said. "Before my mother was born." "Before your mother was born," Bernard repeated. Something moved across Vivian's face. He caught it and held it in his mind. The way her eyes dropped just briefly, and then returned to Sera's watch with an expression that was no longer accusation. That was older, heavier, that was recognition. Bernard's voice was quiet. "Mother, did you know Henry Calloway?" Vivian turned toward the window. There was nothing out there worth looking at. Just the street, a gray November morning, 2 pigeons on the edge of a planter, but she looked at it like she needed somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't this room. "He worked for your grandfather," she said, and then she stopped. Bernard waited. Vivian pressed one hand flat to the lapel of her coat, a gesture she made when she was about to say something she had practiced for a long time or something she had not rehearsed at all. "He was your grandfather's driver," she said, "for 11 years. He left in, I don't remember exactly, the mid-70s. Sera was very still. "Henry Calloway," Bernard said. "Yes, he worked for the family, yes, and then he left." Vivian turned back to the room. People left. People come and go from families like ours. It's not unusual. Bernard looked at his mother. 30 years of watching her had taught him what it's not unusual really meant. It meant, do not pull this thread. It meant there is a thread and if you pull it the whole thing comes apart. He pulled it. Why did he leave? Vivian's chin lifted. The familiar motion. Whose was it? She was quiet, for 4 full seconds. In Vivian Okafor's silences, 4 seconds was a long time. Your grandfather's, she said. Finally Sera was watching Vivian now with a careful, focused attention, and Bernard recognized it because he felt the same thing rising in him. Not anger, not triumph. Something closer to dread and necessity combined. The feeling of standing at a door you have not opened, understanding that once you do, there is no version of this moment where you close it again. What happened? Sera asked. Vivian looked at her sharply. Mrs. Okafor, Sera said, and her voice was gentle but it did not waver. My grandfather kept that watch for 50 years and never once talked about where it came from. He talked about his work, his friends, his neighborhood. He never talked about yours. When I was a child I asked him once about his life before my grandmother, and he went very quiet and said some memories are not for retelling. He looked, she paused, he looked the same way you look right now. Vivian's composure slipped. It was small. The way her right hand moved slightly at her side, reaching for something that wasn't there. The way her breath changed. Bernard had seen his mother weather a husband's death, a son's funeral, 3 collapsed business deals and 2 public scandals involving the Okafor name. He had never seen her look the way she looked in that moment. Not broken, not weak, but tired in a way that wealth could not insulate her from. She sat down. There were chairs along the lobby wall for waiting clients, and Vivian Okafor, who did not sit in waiting chairs, who did not wait for anything, lowered herself into one of them without looking to see if it was there. Bernard sat beside her. Sera did not sit. She stood a few feet away, giving them space and not going anywhere. The lobby had found a way to continue around them. Danny had begun a quiet, urgent-looking phone call. The 2 associates had retreated to the inner offices. The articling students had vanished. But the space felt smaller now. More private. Something had changed in the air, the way air changes in a room after someone says a true thing. Vivian looked at the floor. Your grandfather, she said, and the words came out not as an announcement but as something being carefully lifted from a box. Was a decent man. I know, Sera said. He was kind. Vivian paused. Your grandfather, Henry. He was the kind of person who made rooms easier to be in. I don't say that lightly. I have spent my life in rooms full of difficult people, and I know the difference. Bernard looked at his mother. He had not heard her describe anyone that way. Not once in 43 years. Vivian lifted her eyes to Sera's. He loved someone in our family. The lobby was very quiet. My father's younger sister, Vivian said. A daze. She was 22, he was 24. This was 1973-1974. The world was different in the ways that mattered and the same in the ways that hurt. Bernard felt the shape of it before she finished saying it. Sera's hand moved very slightly to her wrist. My grandfather would not have tolerated it, Vivian continued. He was a good man in the business sense, fair to his employees, punctual, generous with Christmas bonuses, but he had a particular idea of what the Okafor name meant, and Henry Calloway, no matter how decent, no matter how careful, was not what that name required. My grandfather said so plainly. He said Adaze had obligations that existed before Henry Calloway arrived and those obligations were not negotiable. And Adaze? Bernard asked. Vivian looked at her hands. She was obedient, she had been raised to be. Sera's voice came soft and steady. What happened to her? Vivian was quiet. The kind of quiet that Bernard now understood. Not reluctance exactly but the physical effort of saying something that had never been said out loud before. She married someone appropriate, Vivian said. 6 months later. A man from Lagos with family connections my father approved of. She moved away. We wrote letters for a while and then we didn't. Bernard said carefully, and Henry? Vivian looked at the floor again. Henry was let go. My father told him there was no longer a position for him. He was given a reference letter that was adequate and a month's wages and a very clear understanding of what would happen if he tried to contact Adaze after leaving. The lobby carried those words without sound. Sera sat down finally. She chose a chair across from Vivian, not beside her, enough distance to think, close enough to hear. He never told us, Sera said. He never told my mother or me or anyone. He married my grandmother 6 years later. He was a good husband, a quiet man, but there was always she stopped, searching for the word. A door he didn't open, Bernard said. Sera looked at him. Yes, exactly. Vivian's hands had stilled in her lap. She was looking at the watch on Sera's wrist. Your grandfather had that watch engraved before he left, Vivian said. I remember seeing it once. He was showing it to Adaze in the garden. I was 14, I don't think they knew I was there. He told her the inscription was a promise, that he would keep moving forward, and he would carry the best of it with him. Sera's eyes filled. She did not look away or wipe them. She let them fill and she sat with it. Bernard watched his mother watch this young woman, and he saw something in Vivian's face that he had been waiting for without knowing it. Not the hardening, not the familiar wall, but the moment before the wall, when the real thing was still visible. Pain, old pain. The kind that does not grow smaller, the kind that grows quieter, which is not the same thing. I should have said something, Vivian said. When I was older, when I understood what had been done, I could have found him. I could have told Adeze. She stopped. Her voice had thinned to something unfamiliar. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was over, that he had built a good life and she had built a good life, and reopening it would only cause damage. Bernard said nothing. I was afraid, she said, not of Henry, not of Adeze, of what it would mean, of what my father had done and what it said about the family I had chosen to remain a part of. If I admitted he had been wrong, then I had to admit that I had known and said nothing, and I was not prepared to carry that. She looked at Sera. So I carried the other version, the clean version. The one where Henry left because he wanted to, where Adeze moved on because she was ready, where my father had simply protected his family the way fathers were supposed to. I carried that version for 50 years. She exhaled. And then I walked into this Los Angeles and saw his watch on your wrist, and the version I had carried for 50 years fell apart in 5 seconds. Sera looked at her for a long moment. When you grabbed my arm, she said. And Bernard looked at his mother, because he had not seen it happen. I thought you were going to take it from me. Vivian said nothing. I thought you were going to call the police and take my grandfather's watch and add it to whatever you were trying to hold on to, Sera said. And I want you to know that I was terrified. I have worked in this building for 4 years. I know what your family name means here. I know what it means when someone like you decides that something belongs to them. Vivian flinched. One small reel. But I was not going to give it to you, Sera said. I was not going to let you call my grandfather a thief in a room full of people without telling the truth. Vivian said, quietly. No, I can see that. Bernard felt the weight of it settle. The lobby was different now. It was the same marble, the same lighting, the same receptionist, who had abandoned any pretense of working and was watching them from behind her computer monitor, with an expression of carefully held attention. But the air was different. Truth had a way of doing that. It did not clean rooms, it did not make them comfortable, but it made them honest, and honest was something. Your grandfather, Vivian said. Was he happy? Sera thought about that. A real pause, not a polite one. I think so, she said. I think he built something real. He wasn't the kind of man who complained about the past. He worked hard. He coached my uncle's hockey team for 11 years. He made the same pot of soup every Sunday until he couldn't stand the stove anymore. He laughed easily. She paused. But there was always something he didn't say. A door he never opened. I thought it was grief about my grandmother dying. Now I think it was older than that. Vivian closed her eyes. I think, Vivian said, and her voice was very quiet, that my father was wrong. And I knew it, and I said nothing, and I have no justification for that. I was 17 when it started. I was 20 when Henry left. I told myself I was too young, too powerless. But I had enough power to find him later, and I did not use it. Bernard said, Adeze. Vivian opened her eyes. Does she know? Does she know any of this? Vivian shook her head. We lost touch before Thomas was born. I had her address for a while and then I didn't. I don't know where she is now. Bernard looked at Sera. Sera looked at him. Between them something unspoken moved. The beginning of a question neither of them had asked yet, but both of them could feel forming. Vivian saw it. Her expression shifted. Henry Calloway had your grandfather's initials on that watch, she said. And your grandfather had a connection to this family that nobody in this family ever acknowledged. Which means... She stopped herself. Sera said it calmly. Which means you and my grandfather have a shared history your family buried. Vivian looked at the watch. Bernard thought about the dates. The mid-70s. Adeze 22. Henry 24. The watch engraved in 1974. The inscription, for the one who carries it forward. A promise made to someone before leaving. A watch kept for 50 years by a man who did not speak of it. A granddaughter who had worn it to work on a Tuesday in November and had no idea that walking into this lobby would split something open. Bernard stood up. He was not sure why, he just needed to be standing. Mother, he said. Whatever happened, whatever my grandfather did, you can't walk into this building and call this woman a thief in front of her colleagues. Vivian looked up at him. That's what you did, he said. Not harshly. Just clearly. Whatever the history, whatever you saw when you looked at that watch, this woman has worked here for 4 years, and you accused her in front of the people she works with. Vivian's face tightened. I know, she said. The words were simple, they cost her something. Bernard waited. Vivian stood up slowly. She straightened her coat. She looked at Sera Calloway, who was still seated, who had not moved, who had the same watchful steadiness she had carried from the moment this began. Miss Calloway, Vivian said. Sera met her eyes. Vivian drew a slow breath. What I said and how I said it. Calling you that in front of people without asking anything first, that was wrong. I am sorry. Sera looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that was measuring not the words but the space behind them. You saw something that hurt you, Sera said. That's not an excuse, no, Sera agreed. But it's true, and I'd rather know the truth than have a clean apology. Vivian made a small sound. Not a laugh. Something adjacent to one, the noise a person makes when they are surprised by being understood. The watch is yours, Vivian said. It was your grandfather's, and it belonged to him before it belonged to anyone's memory. That's what I should have said the moment I walked in here. I'm sorry I said something else. Sera touched the watch lightly with 2 fingers, the way you touch something old that matters. I didn't know about a daisy, she said. I didn't know any of this. But I knew my grandfather was a man who had kept something private and precious for his whole life, and I think now I understand what it was. She paused. He kept the watch because it was proof that he had loved someone honestly, and someone had loved him back. Vivian's eyes filled. She did not hide it. For once, she let it happen in a room where people could see. Bernard looked at his mother. Really looked at her, without the decades of management between them, without the careful distance he had maintained, and saw something he had not expected to see today. A woman who had been wrong for a long time, and who had just said so out loud and who was still standing. He thought about Thomas, about grief, about how grief had given his mother permission, over these past months, to reach into every corner of her life and call it pain. To point at things and claim them. To mistake recognition for ownership. He thought about how grief could do that. How it could take something real and make it a weapon without the person ever choosing that. Exactly. And he thought about Sera, standing in this lobby with folders and a watch and 4 years of quiet steady work, who had simply refused to disappear. Who had not yelled, not wept, not filed anything. Who had held her wrist back by 1 inch and said, "I'll show you, but I'm not handing it over." That 1 inch had changed everything. Bernard looked at his mother. "I want to find a daisy," he said. Vivian blinked. "She's family," he said. "Whatever else happened, she's family, and we lost track of her because of what grandfather did, and I want to find her." Vivian was quiet, not the practiced quiet, the real one. "And whatever she wants, whether she wants to know about Henry Calloway's granddaughter, whether she wants nothing at all, we respect that, but we try." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. It was a small thing. One nod in a lobby on a gray Tuesday. But Bernard understood it as what it was. The first movement in a direction his family had been facing away from for 50 years. Danny behind the reception desk had stopped pretending to work entirely. She caught Bernard's eye and quickly looked down. He did not mind. Sera had risen from the chair. She collected her folders from the edge of the reception desk with the same quiet efficiency she had set them down. She was returning to the work she had been carrying when all of this began. Bernard thought there was something in that. Something about the kind of person who picks up what they put down and keeps going. "Miss Calloway," Bernard said. She looked back at him. "If you're willing, and there is no obligation, I'd like to learn more about Henry. About what he was like, the man he became." Sera considered him. She was not easy with it, and he respected that. She had no reason to offer anything to people who had caused her grandfather harm. "He made the best soup I ever ate," she said finally, "every Sunday. Same pot, same recipe. He never wrote it down. He said the whole point was that you had to watch." Bernard smiled. It was the first time he had smiled all morning. Sera looked at Vivian. "He also coached hockey for 11 years, not because any of his grandchildren played. None of us did. He just thought children needed somewhere to be where nobody expected them to be anything other than themselves." Vivian's eyes were still wet. "That sounds," she said carefully, "like a man who knew the value of a space like that." "I think he did," Sera said. "I think he spent enough time in rooms where he was expected to be something specific. He wanted to give other people the opposite." The lobby was quiet. Outside, the gray November morning continued. Traffic on the street, the pigeons gone from the planter. Someone walking past with a coffee and a green umbrella. Vivian Okafor looked at the watch one last time, not with the same expression she had worn walking in, without hunger, without claim, with something that was finally just sorrow. Clean sorrow, the kind that does not need to take anything from anyone. "It suits you," she said. Sera looked down at her wrist. She did not answer right away, but she did not disagree. Bernard walked his mother to the lobby door. The morning received them differently on the way out. He felt it, the way the space behind them had changed shape, had settled into something heavier and more honest than what they had arrived to. At the door, Vivian paused. "I was unkind," she said. "Not to the room, just to him." "You were," he agreed. "I am going to be less unkind." She said it the way she said other things she intended to be permanent, without ceremony, without theatrics. Just the statement and the weight of it. Bernard held the door. His mother walked out into the gray morning and did not look back. And Bernard stood at the threshold for a moment, watching her go, thinking about the 50-year distance between what people do and what they mean, and what it costs, and whether it is ever truly too late to close it. He thought it probably was not. He thought it was worth trying to find out.